Well, hello congregation. Welcome to the Tower of Light. Here we are. This is the Gatsby JAMstack introduction. There's going to be, so this isn't like a, well actually just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys are, or consider yourself like React developers or experienced with React? Yes. Okay, cool. So this is like specifically a talk for you guys. A lot of you have probably heard about Gatsby, and like you know, I was skeptical in the early years, and it's no longer a good thing that I've been in Drupal for 14 years. It's kind of sad. You know, for like several years, I've been like looking for something that made me excited again. And Gatsby actually changed my mind, which was kind of like an amazing story, which is actually somewhat like almost like a preacher story where, you know, it was sort of like I was in sin and then I got saved. Hallelujah. Amen. I also hate JS frameworks just in general. I am definitely not a fanboy at all. And I think that's through, how many of you have worked on headless Drupal projects before? How many of you love them? Wow, went down real fast, yeah. So my experience with most like JS frameworks and headless Drupal projects was, it was somebody's first attempt at Drupal and then somebody's first attempt at this framework. And it's just natural that we'll feel the hate towards JS frameworks if we ever have to work with these. I also, you know, like, again, with like cynicism, you know, there were a lot of headless talks where it was just sort of like, all of you build me the JSON APIs and everything will be cool. And it's, there's a shortage of actually experienced backend Drupal developers. So it doesn't make sense to optimize this for front ends necessarily, but that's good news with Gatsby, and we're going to get into this. Also, this is we're going to actually be diving into a lot of code, but this is just sort of the setup. I'm also, it's like if you've ever described how to like template to another Drupal developer, like to another developer who doesn't know Drupal. I mean, it is kind of like this, where it's sort of like, oh great, I get to just like name a template if I want a new thing, and it's like, no, you have to register that in hook theme. So there's like 4 things you can mess up there, and then there's oh yeah, get the template file right, and then get the theme file right, and it's you know, I guess that's why it pays well. The other thing is, and this is something I really hate about frameworks, is learning a framework is not like a substitute for like knowing the actual building blocks. Like, there's maybe 7 things that are horribly wrong with this example. But I feel like it's not like a stretch to say that a lot of the sass that we see around here completely misses the point of the cascade in the C. So that's the sort of skepticism and grumpiness that I approached Gatsby. My first impression of it was honestly predictable. And in fact, I was so angry at it that I started writing a blog post, you know, warning people from Gatsby's evil. But then I started double checking my assumptions and I fell in love with it. And a big part of today's story is why we fell in love with it. And a big part of that is React components, which are one of the most awesome things that you guys are ever going to see. Everybody wants to do this. It's such a breath of fresh air. The way of like handling like CSS is out of this world. And then Gatsby kind of actually integrates Drupal. Anyhow, getting ahead of myself. So, anybody tried Gatsby yet?
Yeah.
Anybody have like an impression? What did you think?
Awesome.
Awesome? Yeah. Yeah, it is awesome. I watched like a bunch of, this is actually the first time I've been able to like talk to like fellow Gatsby developers here in Badcamp, but it's, there's a, Jesus is doing a session next. We'll do the bigger sort of like, how does Gatsby like fit in with the bigger ecosystem? But this is sort of like a nuts and bolt code talk. Anyhow, I think the most important part is that Gatsby really wants to make websites fast. And the co-founder said that we're not looking to build a platform making it easy to make a fast website. We're looking to build a platform that makes it hard to make a slow website. So that's where the framework comes in, and that's where you have to like be with Gatsby on stuff. But then there's a JAMstack, and JAMstack is kind of stupid. It's like seriously, like JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. Could you be more vague? Like LAMP stack is like Linux, Apache, you know, MySQL, PHP, and this, like, come on. Like, I know it sounds cool, like, but what are we gonna do? We're gonna like create like RadStack and be like, I don't know. And yeah, it's very lazy, and but this is important. It's so like there's like a few rules when you're doing a JAMstack application, which Gatsby is definitely one of them. Which is so if you're going to ask whether like a web form is something you do in Gatsby, the answer is no. I mean, you could, but why? You'd want to use like a lead capture service. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be better. You don't have to like deal with web forms, and you integrate it. Absolutely nothing interactive is going to happen on the server that's not client side. That's, I think, the biggest point of JAMstack. And a lot of people are selling this, and if you're a professional in this community, that's going to be very important to you because, like, okay, $5,000 a month in hosting cost on a Drupal site to $5 a month. That sounds like insane, but I've heard real examples of that. Where it's like, as soon as you're just like serving flat files, there are so many like infrastructure things you don't have to worry about anymore. Like you don't have to have like these like super geniuses who like understand Varnish and like Redis and all of this. It's just sort of like it's flat files. You can bet your bottom. See, like CTOs are getting this like message really hardcore. So I advise everybody to get up to date about it. To be honest, I mean, it's so. Sorry. In the big system, this is sort of the simple way I'd put it. Is we're going to manage content messes in Drupal. So by content mess, I mean like workflows, like you know, who can log in, like when does something get published. That goes to Gatsby. That's actually going to generate the entire public site, of course, and then we have JAMstack over here, and it's actually like so like you know he has buttons, right? So you like push to a branch and it's like push a button, I guess. But it is funny because like Netlify, which is my favorite JAMstack platform, it actually does just push it to a CDN. So like in the end, the CDN's doing the work, not Netlify. But that's like the basic model. So I'm sure everybody's wondering, like, okay, so where do we get started? I apologize, I have to go to code to show you this. We do have a repository that is connected to Drupal with like the intention of making it easy, so you can just like install like a Drupal 8 site and then connect it to Gatsby through a few steps. So I'll just start with like the basic structure of Gatsby directory. Basically, Ignore that. Ignore that. Ignore that. Ignore node modules. This is your public folder. And Gatsby is kind of like a web compiler. So this is actually where your public pages are. You would never check this into Git, ever. And you would never try to debug for this folder. So just completely ignore that folder. Static is where there's like anything that's not content, like a site logo, something like that. Hopefully we'll know what ignore is. We'll get into Gatsby Node is actually what's going to tell you what to build the pages. We'll sort of like come back around to this, but the point is like this isn't like a very complicated structure here. There's not a lot to learn, like compared to Drupal, where you have to like learn file paths and all of this, and like something doesn't work because you put it in the wrong place or you named it the wrong thing. That is not true in Gatsby or React. So this is actually what really changed my mind, was what front-end development looked like in React. So this is the kind of the most basic React page in Gatsby that I could come up with. A couple things, sorry. In Drupal land, we're like used to everything loading automatically, and that is not the case in Gatsby. That's why it's actually fast. It's because we're not loading automatically. So one thing you're going to have to get used to is importing the things you need. Helmet is your like page title, your SEO stuff. You can write whatever meta tags you want within Helmet. It was actually sponsored by the NFL, so they named it Helmet. That's why. But then, you know, after this, I don't know if you guys noticed, but it's like a little bit weird if you're not used to this. This is like JavaScript, but why is HTML rendering correctly here? And that's because of this great technology called JSX, which is like a templating system for JavaScript. It doesn't work in browsers. It needs to be compiled by Node stuff, but if you're using Gatsby, you don't have to worry about compiling or any of that stuff here. It's already set up. You can just do it like this. There's a few like weird syntax things that you're going to have to get used to, but I'm neither qualified nor do I think it's interesting to explain why the syntax is the way it is. I want to get to like the real meat here because I only have so much time. One thing you probably notice about this is like this is HTML, and that's not what we want to do. We want to have something that's a little more structured. In this example, which I call example markup barf, I define a new React component, and it's like the original one, except now I'm passing in this props variable, which is going to get passed in automatically. And then, you know, props, title, we can all read. The really important one though here is children. That allows you to actually put components within components. So and in many ways, the way this looks is like HTML. Exactly like HTML, except you're defining your new HTML elements here in React. This is like, I mean, compared to a Drupal template, like this is such an easy, simple system. Like sure, there's a lot of mistakes, but I feel like it's just so straightforward. There's in a Gatsby, it's not straight React. Gatsby has a lot of opinions about React. In fact, if you've ever tried React, you might have had the experience of being like, wow, I mean, this is cool and all, but like way too much to learn. Like, how do I route a page to somewhere? And then you'd like read blog posts and be like, well, these are the various things. Gatsby makes a lot of the decisions for those. So for example, the reason this page is showing up in my examples, I haven't even showed a page, I forgot to do that. It's up here. and example 3, which doesn't look great, but that's not really the point. So there is one special layout or component called a layout, which would be like the sort of page wrapper, which we show here. I'm going to go back to that if we have time. I don't actually think it's necessarily relevant right now. So like a big thing, and this is one of the things that actually turned me on though, was how styles are handled in React. So if you guys are used to Sass, you can do that. That's fine. It's like perfectly handles Sass, but React has a new kind of freaky way of handling this called style components. So the idea is, and I know this is if you haven't been exposed to this before, it's going to sound kind of weird, but we actually define the style in the same page as we do the component. So we actually keep these like together. The reason being that how many of you have ever used or been a part of a project that had like 55 Sass files and like various directories? They're trying to use like Firebug to like find where like in God's name that freaking class is. And yeah, we do like text search, but it's not very good. In sort of like the React way of thinking of doing components, you actually do stuff that's freaky like this. Like this is the layout, so we give it whatever style we want. And then if we actually go to the markup, this is where it gets super interesting, is because you're wondering probably like what class is this? So this is another reason I hated it when I first saw it. Is I was like, what is this? What is this gobbledygook here? Like, what read that? But it's actually giving you some like useful information, like what was the component that generated it. It's also not going to clash with other classes, so you don't actually have to worry about like changing one class versus another. It's I guess the way you need to sort of, the change of thinking is that instead of having a giant Sass directory and a giant set of templates, we just do this all in one file. We keep those files specific to that like single part. So like we have an article teaser, like we'll have article teaser styles that are attached to that, but we won't go anywhere else with that. So you can always go to like one file and see everything that's happening. And it makes sense because, no, this does not render in like inline styles. This renders in a CSS file properly. So if you're worried that it's going to be less efficient, nah. So, you know, it's compared to Sass, I think if you start a project with this kind of in mind, I think it's going to go a lot of places. I actually, with the Drupal kit, I was using atomic styles. How many of y'all have used that? So that's like the atoms, the molecules, the organisms. And I definitely reverted that because just sort of thinking of what the thing actually is as opposed to trying to do like a metaphor of like, what's a molecule, what's an organism? It's kind of like a... That's just kind of, this could be like a 7-hour talk of like possibilities. We don't have time. So I'm going to go straight to how you build actually a page from Drupal to React. Setting up the Drupal side is actually quite easy. So this is my, the articles are the onion. But there's actually only a couple things. You want to download JSON API, which is not in core yet, I don't think.
8.7.
8.7 it is. Cool. But JSON API allows Gatsby to talk. You do have to set a permission to make anonymous requests available if you want to be easy about this. If you're doing this in production, obviously you're going to want to do something like HTTP auth and protect your data and stuff. But this is just from the standpoint of getting started. The final part is you're going to want to set up a webhook with something like Netlify. Anybody used Netlify before? I think this is one of the best services just sort of ever. I'm going to I'll be out with it. I don't know why my builds are failing right now. But that's all right, because when your builds fail on Netlify, your site doesn't go down. Your site never goes down on Netlify. But from like the perspective of setting this up from Gatsby, the one thing you do really need to do is you need to set up a build hook. So I set one up for Drupal. This is just an API that's available from Netlify to let it know that it needs to like rebuild the static site. And then there's this convenient webhooks module in Drupal, which then will look familiar to anybody who's there we go. So yeah, we have just a Gatsby webhook and payload URL. I mean, I don't think this needs a lot of explaining. I don't know if anybody feels differently. Cool, because now we have to get into the actual GraphQL and then making Gatsby render a page. And again, I apologize, like 45 minutes is, if you're not familiar with like React or Gatsby, this is a lot. Like it's a big forest. I'm showing you guys a few trees and hoping that you see what I see, which is this is a great place to build a new house. So your actual page building process is going to happen in Gatsby node.js, which is at the root. This runs only when you're building a new site. All right. So here we're defining sort of our template. So this should sound familiar. That's a taxonomy template. That's a page node type template. That's an article template. And then GraphQL. Who's used it? GraphQL is amazing. So, sorry, I'm going to go back. We're doing a GraphQL query here to get all of our pages, all of our articles. And then this is a pattern that you can copy and paste. Everybody uses it. I'm not going to explain it line by line. But what I do want to show you is how did I come up with that query? So, if you've ever used a REST interface, you've probably had to look at API documentation, which sucks. It's troublesome. Like you hope to like whatever that they've done it right. GraphQL actually has no. This is the API documentation. If something is implementing GraphQL in this interface of like localhost 8000 GraphQL, it's all right here. Everything available to your site. So you don't even have to know anything about, say, Drupal, for example. You can be like, all right, article, that sounds important. All right, what's the type? Okay, and then you like just sort of dig down, and then once you get to the node, you have a bunch of fields. In the Drupal land, relationships is important. That's where you're going to find your image fields. That's where you're going to find your taxonomy fields. And remember, nobody did any work to make this API work besides the people who did JSON API. So like nobody has to custom develop the backend API for it. It's just sort of there. Making it even freakier is that in some of these apps, we can switch out Drupal or WordPress, and like we have to like update field names. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. You can connect this to like how many ever things you want. So in this NodeJS example, that's the actual GraphQL output, which I'm sorry, we don't have enough. Look at GraphQL, it's really cool. But we're using path. That's what actually is going to generate the path of the page. I've used path auto because I'm really creative. And then we're passing it to the component, which is the template that's going to generate it. And then context, which node ID, which I think for any Drupal developer, like the reason why we do that is because it is kind of like, at its core, it's kind of like a template with, sorry, let's see. So we passed in a node ID, and then right over here, this is GraphQL, isn't it? And I know this is going to take a while to learn, and it's kind of hard to see at first, but I swear it's easy. And then we're doing a little query that actually brings it down to like one node ID, and then we have all of our data. So that's the hardest part of doing this, in my opinion, is taking that initial page query that's in Gatsby Node.js, and then routing it to a template and then figuring out how to write this query. But once you write that query, like everything is actually disturbingly familiar. You know, like field image, title. Remember, you have like that GraphQL interface to help you out. And like the pattern is pretty strong once you get to it. This repo was built off of the blog example, but has changed quite a bit. One other thing I'll just say briefly about GraphQL is like MySQL queries, you don't want to be doing them over and over again, so they actually do have a concept of fragments, which is sort of like a save query. So this is actually the more complicated node query. And then you'll see this image handling, which is pretty weird at first sight. Some of it's familiar, but that's the pattern. Just get used to it. Use Gatsby. There is a big advantage to it, though. If you go to I said this earlier in the talk, and I probably did not emphasize it well enough, that Gatsby wants to make it hard for you to make a slow website. So because we're using that image query, you'll see some like freaky stuff here. Like, did you see that thing where the image was? Yeah. So it loaded that one first, and then like once you load it, then it shows the actual image. So if like you're on like a mobile browser, like let's say I was actually using the Wi-Fi here, that would be really helpful to me. Also. Like stuff like auto loading, like those images below there don't load until I go down. That's stuff that's just sort of taken care of for you in the platform.
Does lazy loading automatically?
Yeah.
Wow.
Unless you try to break it. Like, and people can be very creative in breaking stuff, and I don't know that Gatsby's really had the full run of people trying to break stuff. But
so if we had a thing with like 1,000 images, it wouldn't try to load 1,000 images until you scroll.
Oh no, of course not. That would be terrible. I mean, that's sort of the thing. Is I was watching this Kyle Matthews, who's like sort of the Dries of Gatsby. He's going to be speaking at 1:30. I'll be very interested to see what he's saying. But I've seen several of his talks, and like one point that really stuck with me is he was like, I really like numbers, and so like, you know, like website performance tuning is like numbers, so that's something that's fun. And so like, you know, sort of as a game, I tried to like start like figuring out like how I could shave stuff off of like page seconds. So most of us aren't like that, but he is, and the results of that brilliant mind kind of come together in Gatsby. So if you want a fast site that integrates with Drupal, like this, I mean, this is good. We're sort of towards the end. Are questions? I don't want to. But
do you know the actual technique that they use for that nice? There's like a skeleton image. It seems like right before.
Yeah. No, I don't. And I love that.
Yeah.
Because that's like something I don't have to worry about.
It's a problem for us. So it's so cool. But we have to move to Gatsby.
Yeah, it's like what you'll find in Gatsby is these little optimizations are everywhere. They're optimizations you didn't even think about. They're like freakazoids about it. That is also a really funny article to have on the front page. But
so what does Gatsby do with stuff that's inherently interactive? Like, does it render it in a way that doesn't work at all, or does it stop you from rendering it? Or?
So this is the rule: is if you have something interactive, like say like a comment form, you use Discus or something, because Discus has figured out spam. They've that's their whole business is doing comment forms well. You're not gonna homebrew that. You can, and React has like several like very good AJAX APIs that could handle that sort of request. But it seems like a lot of work where I think really the direction that all of this is moving is let's use all the services that do the right, the best job at stuff, as opposed to like trying to homebrew our own lead management system. And yeah, in Gatsby, there's you'd want to do. There's a place to do it. I'm sorry, I forgot where. I need to do this too, but that you can do it in a way that won't interfere with like the loading of the page. So you won't get stuff like you'll find on a lot of websites where it takes 30 seconds to load on a mobile phone because there's like crappy marketing, analytics API loading, and then the other one, and then the other one, and that's kind of like a slow website. Yeah.
So what were some of your pain points when you first started doing this, and what do you feel like helped you like in your skill set to kind of get past?
So the first website that I inherited that was Gatsby, it was a production build on Gatsby and Contentful. Contentful's very, very in vogue. It was horrible. I'd say that the main reasons were that one, they were trying to do like really complicated markup or sort of page layouts and designs, but Contentful will make you use Markdown. So the way they did that was like nested field set after nested field set in Contentful, and it was just absolutely horrible. They also didn't seem to like see the flexibility of React, and they did too much testing, which sounds kind of weird, but like one of the great things about like the React templates we were like looking at earlier is they're like flexible, and you can add a new attribute if you want. They took testing to such a ridiculous place that if I did so much as like change an attribute or add a new one, it would freak out, and then I have to go to the test. And it's I actually think that like in React, there's limited things it needs to test, of course, but don't test everything. That was a pain point. And then the fact that it was just so complicated and React is so simple. So like the examples, I hope, reinforce that React is actually pretty easy. That was about it. And then I was trailblazing Drupal integration as well, but that was actually pretty easy. One of the big problems actually in this initial build is inline files aren't working right now, but I talked to Jesus, who's giving a presentation after this one, and he already has a patch for it that they're planning on applying today. So stuff is happening.
Where's the code for this?
Oh, it's at be at GitHub, JAMstack. It's just at JAMstack Gatsby Drupal Kit. After this talk, I have to fix something that I broke sort of in the last minute thing for this presentation, but I'll have it fixed in 30 minutes after. So download this. It'll connect to that Pantheon site that I showed you, and it's going to like feed in that. But at the bottom, there's also really specific instructions on what it takes to actually set this up for your own. So I didn't want to like run an NPM for you guys because it's boring. Yeah.
Would you say Gatsby would be good for something like an e-commerce site?
So a lot of e-commerce sites are using Gatsby, and absolutely under the if they're using like a Shopify or like some sort of like API, then it's like a perfect fit. If they're doing like a lot of custom stuff and there's like a lot of back-end processing, I'd probably take a closer look at the requirements. But there've been a number of big e-commerce sites that I forgot what they are.
Shopflamingo.com.
Which one?
Shopflamingo.com.
Shopflamingo. Let's go.
Shopflamingo.com.
So that would be the Gatsby e-commerce site. I'm also on a really slow mobile connection, so it's slow, but you know it's not actually hanging up. I can still do stuff as it loads up, and notice that where it's loading stuff as it needs. That's Gatsby, but yeah, that's one example of an e-commerce site on Gatsby. Any other? Yeah.
So, looking at your GraphQL query, it looked like you were just getting all nodes from the site.
Yep.
So, if you also want your taxonomy landing pages and views, then you have to devote a lot more work to the GraphQL. Is that right?
So there's no views integrated. There is actually I am grabbing taxonomy terms right there. Another thing Jesus and I were talking about was stuff like menus and sort of like custom blocks. So we're going to try to get some patches in. It's unclear why Gatsby is not automatically putting it in. You can use another plugin that's just the straight GraphQL plugin, and that will bring in everything. But I wouldn't do that necessarily right now. So like right now, for example, if you really needed a menu, until we figure that out, I'd probably make a content type called menu.
But basically your strategy is figure out which pages we want to be in the Gatsby site and come up with GraphQL and pull those pages in.
Exactly, yeah. So there's one limitation, which is currently, I'd say it's been quoted as 30,000 pages is where Gatsby might like hit its limit, and the way around it would be actually sharding different pages to different servers. But Gatsby 3.0 is going to handle that and fix it. Yeah.
So does this GraphQL implementation that's in the default Drupal connector, does it have any concept of like touch data? Like people that understand like the idea of being like a data field or something?
Yeah, no. It so you'll see that in the actual GraphQL interface where like these data types actually have a type in the actual API.
Yeah.
And then explains it. The GraphQL query, I don't think will actually get mad at you if you have a valid query, but somehow it's like of the wrong type.
So the follow-up question then, have you used any React typing integration like to do type enforcement on the React?
Yeah, just very, very generally in the the sense that in the actual like templates for say an article, in those like GraphQL queries. It's passed in the, sorry, it's not right. It's passed in the NID context, and then it does a basic type hinting. I'm sure that I could do a much more anal type hinting than just integer, but it definitely does. And yeah, it gets really mad if you don't follow that. It just doesn't build. But that's another thing that I love about it is if you mess up production build for some reason, your site isn't going to go down. It's just not going to deploy. Like the site's fine. Let's see where. Oh, I think we're almost. Any other questions?
I guess just to clarify, the content editors are still in Drupal, right?
They're still in Drupal. So from their standpoint, they will be using a standard Drupal website. There's preview functionality that's actually on the way. So with a Gatsby build, just to show you this, when you're doing Gatsby, you're going to do Gatsby develop, and it's going to take a while to sort of grab everything. It's actually grabbing the entire Drupal site via GraphQL right now, and then transforming it. So from like a preview functionality, that's not very good. So I think there is a preview thing that the actual company now that's doing Gatsby is working on that we're going to apply to Drupal very soon. That'll allow the like instant previews that go through like this Gatsby pipeline. Yeah, so I mean that takes a little too long for a lot of editors. So my current solution would be to make a really good WYSIWYG that close enough approximates what it's going to look on the actual website. Which, strangely enough, is like a big, again, like a lot of these integrations are using Markdown, so like editors can't even see what's going on, they just have to learn Markdown. Like that's the message, is like, learn Markdown. I don't like your HTML. Since we're Drupal, we can just give them HTML and perhaps convert it to Markdown or do whatever. It's all about the editor experience, right? It's not about our technological opinions. Nobody's going to use this if they don't like entering in content. Yeah.
So is the workflow something similar to like an editor makes a change and then they save it and then the whole site recompiles and deploys every single time?
There's several workflows. The one that I describe in the starter kit is exactly that. So if you update any node, it's going to automatically send a build request to Netlify and rebuild it, and it'll show up in about 1.5 to 2 minutes. There's a lot of ideas on that though. Like some of them are that content should actually be a branch, like of Git, and then we should put all of them. I'm still like, I'm an old skeptical dog. I don't know how I feel about that. I was watching talks and people were asking questions like, so if we have code in a repo, do we put content in another repo? And like the answer was like, well, we're all figuring that out right now, and that's like not an answer I want. So like a basic question like that. Also, just like imagining like telling some university editor that now you're thinking in merges, you're not thinking in publish. Like, come on. If we do the Git workflow, anyways, we have to abstract it away, and nobody should know what's going on in the back end, in my opinion. This is not. Yeah.
Doing any kind of state management, because that's what React has state.
Oh, yeah. So that's the whole thing. React is really good at state management. You're not going to be using a jQuery plugin or having like a separate JavaScript file that's like, when I click this button, I do this. No, it's all going to be in the same component where your styles and all of that is. The way it handles it is actually freaking amazing, and that's like hour-and-a-half presentation on itself, which I can't give yet.
You can escape or
See, this is a React application. You can use the default state or use videos or anything you want. For example, it's a React application, so you can do anything you want in React. So the final result is a React.
I think we're out of time, by the way. Are we? Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for attending the service. Go forth.